Hello, Watem here, and welcome back to some more Higurashi When They Cry. It's actually been a while since I recorded the last part, but hopefully from your perspective it will only be a couple of days between me recording this and the first part actually coming out on YouTube. Yeah, don't really have anything else to say, so let's continue.
その理由は私と一部の高級将校しか知らん。私を除き全員が他界した今、高野くんの後を継ぐみおちゃんには話しておこうと思う。
だんだん。
研究させたくない都合とは何ですか?
Takano had believed until this day that her grandfather's research was ridiculed by everyone, which was the reason why it had never gained any recognition. Her grandfather had asked the military for funding so he could uncover the secret of Hinamizawa syndrome during the war. But just like the old man had said earlier, the military wanted an instant-acting weapon. That was why they weren't interested in his research. That's what she had believed. But as it turned out, the military had shown an interest after all. Before I go on, I need to explain about the Kwantung Army in Manchuria at the time. While the Kwantung Army was stationed in Manchuria, opinions were divided on whether to advance our forces north or south. At the time, Japan had troops in Manchuria, but opinions were divided on advancing north to serve the Soviet Union, or advancing south to expand our territory and secure resources. With the Soviet Union and its predecessor Russia being a landlocked, frozen nation, they had long yearned for an ice-free port that wouldn't freeze over in winter. They'd made numerous attempts to expand their territory southward too. Those expansionist policies were said to be a cause of the Russo-Japanese War. In the history books it said that Japan won the Russo-Japanese War, but it was actually a draw, ending in peace signed at the Treaty of Portsmouth. Both sides had simply set aside their spears after mutually exhausting their forces. It wasn't like Russia capitulated and offered a complete surrender. Yeah, not like Japan could actually go over all that way to make it there, or vice versa, Russia get all the way into Japan. As a result, the perception of a Russian threat continued to smolder. Yeah, that was actually part of the reason why Germany thought that Russia would just be a pushover to invade. They went, oh, Russia lost to Japan? All the way over in the east? Must be a pushover then, effectively. Must be easy. We can just... It'll be over by Christmas, right? Anyway, later the Russian Empire was overthrown by a revolution, but Japan was unable to shake the threat that the new Soviet Union would advance south. According to history books, Japan went south. They signed the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact and abandoned the northern advance. As a result, when the Great Patriotic War began, the Soviet Union was able to respond to pressure on their German front by pouring in their eastern forces. Though the Germans had managed to lay siege to Moscow, the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive that reversed the tides of war. Even with the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact, the Soviets couldn't tell if Japan would attack them at some point. Because of that threat, the Soviets had to leave some forces in the Far East, and they weren't able to devote enough troops to the German front. For starters, the Soviets had forged the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact too. Yet Germany broke the treaty and attacked the Soviet Union. To make matters worse, Japan and Germany had forged a military alliance. With all those factors in play, the Soviets naturally couldn't trust Japan to uphold their neutrality pact. Ironically, the Soviet Union was one who broke the pact, but I won't go into that now. Exactly. Hitler signed the Tripartite Pact because he expected Japan to keep the Soviets' other front in check. but ultimately, Japan abandoned the north. With a superior German offensive, many supported the idea of waiting and watching it play out. They believed that even if we did advance north, it would be after Germany conquered Moscow. However, that plan was exposed to Sorge, and the Soviets transferred their heavy tanks from their Far East border to the German front. That secured Germany's defeat at Moscow, and the Germans began seeing a string of defeats starting with the Battle of Kursk. It was a turning point in history. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union was recognized as a global power, but at least in 1940, the Kwotung army didn't think it was a particular threat. Japan had earned a victory with the Russo-Japanese War, and they took the new Soviet Union government lightly, assuming it wouldn't be stable after overthrowing the Russian Empire. That underestimation was corrected after the Normanhan incident in 1941. After several fierce short-term battles with the Soviet Union's advanced mechanized corps that led to great losses, the Kwotung army realized they shouldn't fight for the Soviets, and thus inclined Japan towards the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact. But at the very least, up until the Normanhan incident, the Kwotung army was strongly conscious of the Soviets and divided their advancing north or south. Why is none of us actually got voice lines? Who's going? What is it? F11 students? No. No. 10. Trying to voice doesn't do anything. Voice matching level is at 2. That should be at 0, I believe. In any case, that wouldn't increase. Where is voice matching level? F2. There we go. That won't increase the amount of talking video, but yeah. So, thanks to that, there are also voices advising caution, suggesting we avoid an all-out war with China in order to shore up our forces against the Soviets. But the Sino-Japanese War broke out after the Marco Polo Bridge incident, right? July 1937. The Japanese and Chinese armies were staring at each other across the Lugo Bridge in Beijing. It was the middle of the night on July 7th. The Chinese army fired on the Japanese army in training. They engaged in combat. This triggered the long Sino-Japanese War. Yes, according to historical records, the incident triggered the Sino-Japanese War, but wasn't this going to be explaining what actually happened with the research? So why? With opinions divided over advancing north or south, the army was equally divided over a full-scale confrontation with China. In fact, we even received orders from General Staff Headquarters to resolve the matter quietly before the incident grew much bigger. So those supporting the northern advance wanted to settle the Battle of Lugo Bridge quietly, insisting that conflict with China was pointless in light of their anti-Soviet strategy. However, those on the mainland supporting the southern advance used this incident as a cause to dispatch more troops to China. They enacted hard policies against China, thus the Marco Polo Bridge incident became the trigger for Japan and China to enter all-out war. After that, and their bitter struggles and the Normanhan incident, Japan greatly revised their Soviet strategy, signed the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact and secured the route for their southern advance. The Sino-Japanese War got worse and worse. If the Marco Polo Bridge incident hadn't happened, it's possible that history would have gone very differently. Maybe we would have ended up in a war with them anyway. However, if the South faction didn't get that chance, military authorities would have kept restraining the Soviet Union, and the Soviets would have had to divide their forces between East and West. And maybe Germany could have invaded Moscow, and Japan could have gone to Siberia. The map could have been very different today. Germany wouldn't necessarily have won the war if it had succeeded in taking Moscow. England was keeping its strength on the other side of the Dover Strait after all, and the United States was poised to enter the conflict. Besides, Napoleon once occupied Moscow, but in the end he couldn't beat their winter and had to withdraw. It's one of those ifs, huh? The Axis might have won the war. Yes, it's possible that the gunshot from the Marco Polo Bridge incident changed the tide of history. Both sides had differing opinions of who fired the shot, right? According to the Japanese side, a Chinese soldier fired a shot at a Japanese soldier who got too close to a Chinese camp. However, the Chinese side claimed the shot was a conspiracy invented by the Japanese military. But the shot was fired, even though nobody knew who actually pulled the trigger. The spark would sign the Japanese war. Yes. That's what the history books say. But Koizumi-sensei, what does that have to do with my grammar power? In the Marco Polo Bridge incident, a shot was fired at a unit that was training in the middle of the night. Everyone was summoned for a roll call. They were missing one soldier. This soldier came back later. It was said that he was sent as a messenger and got too close to a Chinese camp. By the way, did you know that soldier was from Hinamizawa? Eh? Really? When Takano-kun was talking about Hinamizawa syndrome, he said that soldiers from Hinamizawa could suddenly fall into a deranged state. He realized that the soldier from the Marco Polo Bridge incident was in fact from Hinamizawa. And what about the first shot fired? I don't know the truth, but I think it's possible that a soldier within the terminal stage of Hinamizawa syndrome fired the shot. That soldier was killed in the incident. Since there was no record of it, nobody knows exactly how he died. The Japanese side claimed the Chinese army had fired at them and negotiated with that in mind. Just a scant few days after the incident, Japan demanded an apology from the Chinese and as a show of force dispatched 3 divisions of reinforcements. The Chinese side was, of course, opposed to that. The situation escalated at once. If research into Hinamizawa syndrome continued, higher-ups thought it would negatively influence the Japanese army's claims. So, in order to avoid the risk of traversing that political grey zone, they rejected Takano-kun's research.
そのためこの時代になってもなお祖父の研究が顧みられることがなかったと。
そうだ。
Wow, so very long actual talking. The war is over now, but there are still some conflicts there regarding historical recognition.
高野君にその気はなくとも、ひなみざわ症候群の研究が公になれば、社会的な影響が強すぎて、一般大衆に不要の混乱と疑念を与えることにもなりかねない。そう危惧した重鎮たちが、今日に至るまで高野君の研究を黙殺するよう根回しをしておったのは、今だから言える話だ。私も高野君に協力しないよう長く釘を刺されておった。
Takano tried to remain calm, but she couldn't stop herself from grimacing. She had just found out the real reason why her grandfather's research had been ignored. It was because of secret maneuvers by political masterminds. Those masterminds feared it so much, ironically, that meant they acknowledged the importance of his research. Takano was saddened and frustrated to no end by her grandfather's lonely life.
だがそういう連中は高いし、もう当時を知る者は私しかおらん。もし今まだ高野君が生きていたなら、私はそれを誤って 全面的な協力を申し出るつもりだった。だが彼はもういない。だから私はミオちゃんに謝り、高野君にするはずだった協力を君にしようと思っているのだ。
よろしいのですか？私が雛見沢症候群の研究をすることで蒸し返しになるということはありませんか？
もう当時とは時代が違う。それに雛見沢症候群の研究には単なる風土病では済まされないものが潜んでおる。研究によっては医学の名前がつくあらゆる学会がひっくり返るような大発見になるかもしれん。
当時とはもう風向きが変わったということですわね。
そうだ。不幸にも高野君は風向きが変わるまで存命することができなかった。だが幸いミオちゃんという後継者に研究を託せた。だから私はこの命ある限りミオちゃんの研究を最大限応援する。私は高野君に協力を約束したのに、さまざまなしがらみから力になれず彼を失望させた。
Unrelated fun history fact. Some consider the Marco Polo Bridge incident to be the start of the Second World War, depending on how you look at it. Since Japan ended up joining the Second World War, the wars were in some ways described as being merged together, in which case the Japan conflict started first.
その償いを命ある限りしていこうと思っている。それが高野君が無二の親友と呼んでくれた私のこの世に残された最後の仕事だと思っとる。
先生、本当にありがとうございます。
いや、いい。私も死ぬ前に洗いざらいを話せてすっきりした。とにかく私の目が黒いうちはミオちゃんの研究に一切の不自由はさせん。何かあったらいつでも頼りなさい。助力は惜しまないからの。
Takano couldn't even imagine what kind of bond this old man and her grandfather had between them. But thanks to that bond, Takano was able to gain a powerful supporter. Tears swelled up in Takano's eyes as she gave him an emotional look, but in her mind she was practically dancing at the promise of the old man's full support. The old man and Takano both bowed at the same time to show each other their appreciation. Once that was done, the old man became a little more serious. That far too lengthy preamble finally said what he really wanted to tell her.
そういうことだ。私が言いたいのはつまり、雛見沢症候群には歴史すらも作りかねない魔力が宿っているということだ。それは日本社会すらもねじ曲げかねない。そこのところをよく肝に銘じて慎重に研究をしなさい。
After the proprietor finished serving the food, she bowed and left. The room was very tastefully put together, reminding them of a tea ceremony room. While it was sparsely decorated, quite a bit of money had obviously gone into it. This was a very famous Japanese restaurant, and many higher-ups, officials, and other important people held secret meetings. Takano was there, accompanied by about 5 gentlemen, just noticing the telephone in the corner there. She was sitting slightly further away from the men. They were clearly in much more important position than she was, One of the men, wearing an expensive double-breasted suit, told Takano not to be so nervous.
どうぞお楽に、高野さん。 今回の件非常に興味深く読ませていただきました。このような研究が数十年にわたり眠り続けてきたとは。
驚きです。過去に行われていたこの類の研究はほとんどが実らず、スタッフも解散となって何も残っていないと思っておりましたよ。
Nothing was left after the US military confiscated even the fundamental research.
この研究は上層部にもほとんど相手にされなかったと聞いております。
なるほど。故に誰にも知られず、そして誰の追及も受けなかったというわけですな。その意味においてだけは本当に幸運でした。
高野先生の研究を高野さんが引き継ぐとは面白い。これも因縁ですかな。まるであなたの体を借りて個人が研究を完成させようとしているかのようです。
本当にそうかもしれませんわね。私も奇妙な因縁を感じます。
Tsukano adored Tsukano Hifumi, and called him grandfather, but she hadn't revealed that relationship to others. She realized it wouldn't be beneficial for people to think she was involving personal feelings in her continuing Dr. Tsukano's research. So publicly, she once had exchanges with Tsukano Hifumi, and after his death, discovered his research documents with his remains and chose to carry it on. At least that's how the story went.
それで先生方、いかがでしょうか。
いくつかの省庁がね、非常に強い関心を持ったよ。
I'm guessing that supporter she has in quote-unquote Tokyo like knows, because he was saying he was talking about her commitment to it and all.
中川君が言うには、防衛庁の技術研究本部が強い関心を示してくれてね、研究のスポンサーを名乗り出てくれた。
おお、それは朗報じゃないですか。おめでとう、高野さん。
ありがとうございます。
なんでも向こうが言うにはね。
There's a research council for next generation deterrence being led by experts from several different ministries.
この中でアルファベットプロジェクトというのがあるらしい。高野さんはご存知ですかな？
There was no way she would know about something like that. But it was very possible for these nationalists to research something dangerous without citizens knowing about it. Society forms something like a web made of connections between people. People hold hands with other people who share the same ideas and end up knitting a net. Of course, some nets are well known, but there are some secret ones too. So there was no way of guessing just how the men at this meeting were connected. Based on how she's been talking, I don't think she's... Well, I mean, she doesn't even know Rika yet, so I was going to say, I don't think she's even planning that whole thing. Society involving research and deterrent weapons of information. Oh. Yeah. The Alphabet Project. Those words, it was possible to imagine what that might entail. Deterrent weapons. That usually refers to a nuclear attack. Weapons are normally used to destroy enemies. However, the general idea of deterrent weapons is very different. The assumption is that they won't actually be used against anyone. Nuclear weapons are largely used as a threat to prevent any invasions. Both the US and Soviets possessed large stockpiles of nuclear arms, keeping each other in check. They were never actually used then, because if they did, there'd be a nuclear war, and both countries would be destroyed. So they're like a legendary weapon we never draw. Of course, that last resort only works because both sides have nuclear weapons. One side lacks them, and they lose all military negotiation power. In other words, nations without nukes are powerless before a nuclear armed strike states. That can't be true. Japan abandoned nukes and still functions as a nation today. That's so some people may be thinking, but they're wrong. I mean, there really aren't many nuclear states at this point in time. There's definitely US, USSR, Britain through the US project. France might be in it, might be a nuclear state by this point in time, but they developed theirs separately from the US because they had a different policy which allowed for first strikes. Which the US and England really didn't like. Yeah. Or because if they did use it, then that could potentially make force the US and England into using their own nukes. But anyway, continuing on. Here on. Japan abandoned nukes but lies under a nuclear umbrella by allying itself with America. True. That means the nation functions thanks to America's nukes. However, that also means we must train ourselves to forever being a vassal of America. In order for Japan to escape that and become a powerful nation equal to America, it must possess its own deterrent arm and step out of that nuclear umbrella. But one thing with using other weapons, biological weapons in particular, your people probably aren't going to be too happy about that. Secondly, for it to work as a deterrence weapon, the other states need to know about it. So probably in the end, your people are going to end up knowing about it, and that's going to ruin your popularity rating. That society must have been put together by experts who believe in the ideal. Given that, even the name Alphabet Project makes sense. Nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction. However, weapons of mass destruction aren't always nuclear. They also include biological and chemical weapons. Atomic, biological, chemical. The initials of these three words make up ABC. That's why weapons of mass destruction is sometimes called ABC weapons. I won't go into weapons of mass destruction that don't belong to these three categories. ABC, alphabet. In other words, Alphabet Project must be a code for research into weapons of mass destruction. As it happened, this guess of Takano's was correct. By rights, Japan should possess nuclear arms. We established ourselves as a peace-loving nation after the war, and after our vast international contributions, we've been recognized as a permanent member of the UN for being a peace-loving nation. And nuclear deterrence just absolutely spells out peace-loving nations, right? Like, US after all, the epitome of peace-loving nation. Can't keep a straight face. Yeah, and yet until we possess nuclear arms, we won't be recognized as a proper nation. That is the long-held desire of post-war Japan. Exactly. However, realistically, thanks to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the major nations hold a monopoly on nukes. Worse, our domestic public opinion is growing allergic to nukes, so foreign and domestic pressures make implementing them impossible. Biological and chemical weapons are sometimes known as the poor man's nukes. Small countries that can't own nuclear weapons have already started research into that kind of weaponry. Takano, please don't misunderstand us, okay? The purpose of our research isn't to obtain a biological weapon. Sure. Instead, our goal is to prevent such weapons coming into Japan from other countries. So this research into self-defense. I want you to understand that. So this is research into self-defense. Yes. I'm aware of that. It's kind of hated this Japanese tendency to make excuses. She didn't let it show on her face. No matter what they said, they already saw the value in using this research towards biological weaponry. However, in truth, that was just an excuse as well. They actually wanted to research biological weapons, and it would be much faster to research diseases like smallpox and anthrax instead of an unidentified disease like Higurashi syndrome. So it wasn't actually correct to say the defense agency was interested in it as a biological weapon. In other words, Takano needed a powerful sponsor who could back her up with funding, personnel, and a facility to conduct her research. So she used her connections and turned to the old men behind the government and economy, reaching out to each of them and getting them to forcibly pull funding out of the defense agency under the excuse of using its application towards biological weaponry. That was the truth. Therefore, the project wasn't officially recognized by the defense agency. To be exact, the people who secretly controlled the defense agency were the ones who knew about it. These masterminds diverted funding from the defense agency to the Alphabet Project, and then they pushed for Takano's research to be a part of it. Takano gets her funding, the influencers get to drain public funds through kickbacks. Considering that, who thought all this project was generally about researching the next generation of Deterrent arms. And on that note, I'll end it here for today. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know any feedback you have in the comments. And until next time, see ya!